Everybody, it's G Marks, and welcome back to another episode of the Hartford Small Biz Ahead Podcast. Very happy that you are joining us today. I am honored and happy to have Peter, or Pete Pabich. Pete is a partner at Entrust Wealth Partners. Pete, first of all, thank you so much for joining. Where are you guys located, by the way?
We're out of West Hartford. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can thank Alyssa, our producer. She's the one that had you on. And I have to, Alyssa and Kaylin is also here. Like, Pete is pretty much of a better looking version of me. Would you agree? We got the bald head. I got the whole the blue shirts.
For what it's worth, I'll agree.
Yeah. Okay. I had a feeling that. Well, listen, we're all in agreement here. We've kind of stepped it up a little bit. But we'll get off that topic. Let's talk a little bit about you guys and what you do. You are a wealth management, a wealth advisor, a financial advisor to clients. Tell us a little bit about Entrust.
Yeah, so Entrust Wealth Partners, our partnership goes back about 20 years. Keith Wetchen, who's my friend and business partner, who has a law background, I'm a finance guy, about 20 years ago put our heads together and said, saw in the financial services, certainly in business succession planning, a lot of overselling and underservicing of clients. And so at that point, we wanted to take advantage of that. And so our partnership goes back that long. And since then, we've been providing comprehensive and holistic advice to the closely held business owner, family business owner, executive, retiree, and thank goodness we've built a thriving firm.
That's great. And is it just succession planning, or is it overall financial or business consulting?
Yeah, good question. It's when I say comprehensive, it's soup to nuts, right? So in some instances, it's a lot of cash flow planning. In fact, almost every plan has to have cash flow planning because you've got to understand how this thing's going to work when you walk away from your business. So it's cash flow, it's comprehensive estate planning, insurance and protection planning, certainly investment retirement planning. And of course, as income tax laws become more and more complex, a lot of our work is tax planning as well.
Yeah. Don't you feel like you've been doing this for a while now? People, when they hear like succession planning or exit planning, you immediately think like, oh, okay, that's just going to be of interest to like older people that are running businesses that want to sell out. And I'm a CPA as well. So and my clients, we have a lot of different clients of different demographics and ages. And I'm like, man, if you're running a business and you're like 30 years old, you should be thinking of succession planning, right? I mean, do you see the same thing?
Yeah, without question. I mean, you can't start too early thinking about it, right? If you're 30 years old and you're starting to grow a business, you can't start too early. It's a function of how do you want things to look when you walk away, right? And for some people, Gene, that's I want to walk away with a big paycheck and I don't care, right? And that's okay. That's okay. But for many other people, it's, well, I might have a child in the business in the future, or if you're 30, you're not necessarily, unless it's a very bright child. But you might have a child in my business, or I want to build a management team. I want a legacy, right? And so you really can't start having the conversations too early, because the worst thing you can do is wait, because you wait and you limit your options.
I just want to get your thoughts on a few different things when it comes to succession planning. The first is buy-sell agreements. I see more than I care to admit, clients that do not have buy-sell agreements. And I'm sure you probably stumble on that as well when you meet people. So give me your thoughts on buy-sell agreements. First of all, tell us what they are, and tell us a little bit about why you think they're important just on the overall, for planning, to succession planning for your business.
So they're critical. And you're right. We come across people without buy-sell agreements all the time, or buy-sell agreements that are so outdated, they might as well not have been drafted to begin with, right? Totally. So in its simplest form, a buy-sell agreement is if something happens that you don't want to happen, right? In most cases, not in every case, but in most cases, something happens that you don't want to happen, a death, a disability. It's sort of the first line of defense in what happens to your ownership in the business, right? And even, from the most complex business structures to the simplest, it's got to be one of the first building blocks with an operating agreement that a business owner has to address. And so, for the consumers of this podcast, if you're a business owner and you don't have something in place that at least fleshes out how you want things to flow if you die disabled, et cetera, you ought to have a simple buy-sell agreement. You shouldn't be intimidated by it either, right? It doesn't have to be War and Peace with a document this big. It can be very simple, but you want that to be there. And you mentioned the 30-year business owner. The younger business owner. Do you want to have something, funding from an insurance standpoint to make sure that your family's protected from a value standpoint? Of course, but even before you worry about that, putting something in place is critical, just to make sure that your wishes are sort of fulfilled when you're not here to make those decisions, or you can't physically make those decisions because something bad has happened.
And it's super important if you have partners, right? I mean, it's one thing if it's just yourself. It does lay out instructions for people if something were to happen to you, but man, you must see the same thing. Family-owned businesses. I have clients that have multiple partners, brothers and sisters, and somebody gets divorced, somebody, gets arrested, people, die. I mean, there's all sorts of things, and then they have an impact on the business. And I don't know if you see the same thing.
Yeah, without question. I mean, listen, the people work so hard to grow value in these businesses, right? And they all look a little different. They all smell a little different. Some people have, family members in the business. There's people out of the business. But money does some funny things, right?
Yeah.
And you can be the most successful business owner and run a thriving business. And again, in the scenario that you talked about, if you've got multiple family members, death, divorce, et cetera, if you don't have things tidied up, things can get pretty ugly pretty quick. And so that's where we started when we talked about earlier. You can't start too early. These conversations ought to be happening now if you're a business owner, regardless of whether you're starting a business and you're just sort of getting your feet on the ground, or whether you have a thriving business and sort of testing the documents to make sure they work the way you want them.
I'll give you a specific example, and then we'll get off buy sell. But I had to bring it up because just like within the past year, I had a client. It was 4 brothers. They each owned an equal part of the business. And one of the lessons I learned for them is that socialism doesn't work because all the equal value. Because of course you had 3 that were pulling their weight and 1 guy that wasn't doing anything at all. And the other 3 brothers were like, it was a problem. Like Thanksgiving dinners were not pleasant. And they had a buy-sell agreement, and they said, you know what, we need to do something about this. And they pull out the buy-sell agreement, and it laid out, stipulations if the existing partners wanted to buy out one of their other partners. Like what were the grounds for doing that? How did it work? You need, the buy-sell agreement said you need an appraisal. Insurance had to be in place. These are the tax consequences. It just laid out a playbook. They luckily had one. Well, not luckily, but they had one that they put together about 10 years ago, and it really helped them navigate the buyout of this one partner.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect example.
Yeah, and to your social, it's always important for a business owner to test what's in place too every couple of years, right?
Yeah.
And if not on your own, with your advisor to say, does this thing still work the way I want it to? Because in your 25% scenario, boy, that's awfully tricky, right? I listen. I mentioned Keith Wetchen is my business partner, right? And I, over 20 years, we find always a way to work through for a better end any business issue that we have to solve, right? But if we were at loggerheads and we were exactly sort of 50-50, does that become an issue? Yeah, it might become an issue. So that family planning in family business is critical. And it's critical not only that you do the agreements and execute the agreements, but it's also critical that you pay attention to them once they're there every couple of years to make sure they still work.
Yeah, well, people have kids, or their personal situations change or their health changes. So, all right. So the takeaway, guys, if you're listening to this, you're watching this, because we are talking about succession planning. And if you're running a business, particularly if you have partners, particularly if you're in a family business, you have to have a buy-sell agreement. And, Pete and I have been talking sort of generally about it, but my advice is you want to talk to a financial advisor, somebody like Pete, or an attorney or your accountant, and go down the road of putting together an agreement. It is a playbook for if anything happens to hit the fan in the future, you at least have got sort of, like I said, a playbook to follow. So that's really, really helpful. Let me shift a little bit, Pete. So people have heard me say on this podcast before that the Small Business Administration has data that shows that more than half of small business owners in this country are over the age of 50. Like the average age is like 55. So there's like this like transition of wealth that is it's like a growing wave that's sort of beginning to happen and will happen even more. Are you seeing that among your clients? Are you seeing more of activity of business owners selling their businesses or having an interest in selling their businesses, particularly after COVID, where a lot of my clients basically want to I'm out of here. What are you seeing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the last 10 years has been absolutely ridiculous as it relates to businesses changing hands. And there's a couple different reasons. I mean, COVID did a lot of things to a lot of people, right? And it did to some extent, and that's a few years back, yes, but to some extent, if you were tired, I mean, dog tired of running your business, and then COVID came on and you had to do everything you needed to do to keep that business alive.
Yeah.
Man, are you tired now? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So that's sort of one thing that we've seen in the last couple of years. But transition, I mean, in the last 10 plus years, the business acquisition cycle has been, I mean, borderline historic, right? You've had extremely cheap interest rates up until the last year. And it's funny how that changed pretty quick. Very cheap interest rates. And you have money chasing cash flows that are in historic fashion. So you have, we even have family business owners who have said, this is a legacy play for us and we want it to be with us for a long period of time. And that's very important. It's not always about money, right? Money's important. Why? Because you have to live your life and you want to support your family. But we have those business owners who have been legacy business owners who have gotten, offers, multiples at numbers they never dreamed of. And it changes their philosophy a little bit. So, I mean, the activity has been remarkable. A few headwinds now with interest rates. Let's face it. When money's cheap, things are a little bit freer and easier. Money's not cheap anymore, right?
True.
And with prime rate where it is, it's real money when you have to service some debt to do this type of stuff. But without question, it has been the last 10 years, and our client base is no exception. We've seen a whole lot of activity on the business sale side of things.
Yeah, I still expect, I'm optimistic that interest rates, will plateau this year. I know the Federal Reserve is getting a lot of pressure to rein them back a bit once they finally get inflation under control. And I do think that will happen. I do think we'll see a resumption of that activity. Cap gains rates, if you sell your business, you're going to have a capital gains tax, and those rates right now are still historically low. So that's a good incentive for people to sell. And then the stock market always spooks people because it's so volatile that they're like, hey man, I'd rather buy a business rather than putting money in the markets where, I have no control.
Yeah, I agree. No, you're absolutely right.
And then what about startups? I mean, there's been, I don't know if you talk to any younger, business owners or entrepreneurs or people that want to get into their own business. So, there's been like this explosion in startups over COVID. A lot of them were like people working from home. They set up a side gig or they're on Etsy or, eBay or whatever. But there's a fair number of people that are either starting businesses or interested in starting businesses. I feel like, dude, unless you're coming up with a new Uber, to me, it makes almost more sense to buy an existing company than start something from scratch. And I'm wondering if you've got thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting take. And I happen to think, both ways can be very effective. I think it depends on the type of person you are, right? There are some people who are so maybe driven's not the right word, but I'll use it anyway, that they want to start their own shop, do it exactly the way they've done, et cetera,
Right.
and start it from ground zero, right? Which makes sense. And that's where we talk to startups about, again, things like buy sells and that type of thing, basic documents, basic things. So if you're in that space, you still want to be thinking a little bit about exit planning, as crazy as that sounds, right?
Mm.
Because you're just starting it. What are you exiting? But just the basics of protection documents, right? But to the other business owner who, wants to buy into a process and or a client base or that type of thing, that's a wonderful opportunity too. We see quite a bit of that too in our business alone. There's a few different ways to do it. I mean, Keith and I started from zero
Right.
almost 20 years ago, and it was, all right, go get it, go find a client. And that's what we
Right.
chose to do. But along the way, we acquired a senior partner's business and a senior partner in a wonderful mentor's business, right? And so we did some hybrid of that, right? We started our own operation while we acquired as well. And of course, our business, our industry isn't unique there too. That's what we're seeing all the time. So I think both can work. I think it depends on what really motivates you to start the business to begin with.
I'm curious, if you had to do it again, would you have, purchased an existing wealth management or financial firm, or would
So
you have started from scratch like you did?
yeah, great question. I think we do it exactly the way we did it. And I'm not saying that, we've always made the right decisions, because Lord knows we haven't.
Right.
But I mean, and it certainly in our industry, again, I'm not sharing specifics about our industry because it's similar to other industries. Everybody gobbles everybody up in everybody's business world. If you have something of some value, somebody wants to buy your cash flow, right?
Right.
And so it doesn't make it, you make widgets, you're in financial services, it doesn't make a difference. But if I look back on our journey, yeah, I mean, a little bit unique. I mean, my experience is I was married without kids when this whole thing started, or not even married actually. So I had a different, your
Yeah.
personal situations matter, right?
Yeah.
If I had a mortgage, right? If I had I did have a mortgage, excuse me. But if I had kids,
Yeah.
which are, we all know, far more expensive than a mortgage,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
We won't get
Yep.
into that.
Yeah.
But I might have made a bit different decision then if I was in a different situation. So you gotta look at your own, as a business owner, look at your own situation. What makes most sense, right? If I had to do it today, I'd have no choice but to buy a book of business, because I can't start from zero. My kids would kick me out of the house, right?
Right.
So it matters what situation you're in your life, whether it's buy an existing operation or start it from scratch, so to speak.
Okay, let's turn to people that own businesses right now, and let's speak to those that are at. I mean, you talked earlier about even when you're starting up a business, you should be thinking about your exit. And by the way, that's such great advice, because any venture capitalist will tell you, if a venture capitalist is investing in a tech startup, they're already talking about the exit. They're like, well, we're going to put this money in because we want 5 years. We want private equity to come in, or an IPO or whatever. So it is completely normal when you're starting up a business to have your exit in mind. That's what people do. But let's assume we're older now. We're running an existing business. And I'm saying to you, you're like, okay, Pete, I'm running this company. I'm thinking of, I do want to start thinking about exiting out of here. Okay. And hopefully a client comes to you and says, I don't need this to happen tomorrow. This would be something that I'd like to, plan for over the next few years. What would you tell them? Like, what advice would you give them?
So the conversations. So if you're in that spot, the first thing I'd say is, so visualize what your life's going to look like after the business, right? And part of that is business, right? How to plan out. I'll explain. And part of it is a little more touchy feely in the world of, so what are you going to do when you exit the business, right? What is your life? How are you going to find value in your life when you're gone, right? So when you start with that end in mind, so to speak, whether it's sell out to the highest bidder and play golf 6 days a week,
right,
or whether it's what we're building at Entrust, which is trying to build, we've built a brand and trying to keep that brand around for a long period of time for future advisors, et cetera. when you start with how it might look like when you're out, it helps sort of flesh out your options, right? Because you've got a whole, I mean, we talk about 5 options to exit business. There's more than that, but for most business owners, there's 5 ways out, right? And everybody, all business owners ought to know what their options are. But when you start the conversation, start it at the end. What do you think it might look like? Well, again, it's amazing, Gene, how different those answers can be,
Yeah.
right? It's some people want to cash out and sit on a beach. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
But other people are going to say, well, wait a minute. If I build something and that's a value of the people that I've worked with for 20, 30, 40 years, I can't walk away from that without having a really strong management team in place, that sort of internal succession approach. So the first conversation is, what do you think it might look like when you leave? And sometimes people have a clear idea and sometimes they need some help. And that's where we talk through it with clients to say, here are the important things. What do you think?
So that's such great advice, because so many of us, we put our whole life into our business. It's like a real important thing. A lot of people have to be busy. Like they can't even picture the fact that, or they don't even like get their arms around the fact that once they sell their business, it's done. Like, so what are you going to do with yourself?
Yeah.
Some people just, they just, hey man, I want to cash out for the biggest price. I don't really care what happens to it afterwards, so fine. And other people are like, no. I want my employees to still have jobs. I want my brand to be there. I want to be able to drive by my business in my hometown and still see it there with my name on it still,
right.
Even 10 years after. All that drives the decision, your route that you take to sell, right?
It sure does. I mean, I use myself as an example, right? So if I have a 10-year plan to start exiting, which I don't today, but in theory, if I have a 10-year plan, what do I want it to look like? Well, part of it is, we're in a business. Not every business is like this, but we're in a business that lends itself, and different people in different businesses, to transition out can be in a few days a week, and that would be fun in my later years, et cetera. But everybody's got to ask themselves the same question, right? Do you care if you're kicked to the curb when you sell the business or not, right?
Right.
Because so many, and we're working with a business owner right now about the same conversation is, okay, you've listed your business for sale. This is a sale to a third party. I said of the 5 ways out, a sale to a third party, you've listed it for sale, right? So we've developed a plan that says, here's how much money you need to walk away net of tax, right? And taxes are a big deal. But oh, by the way, so what are you going to do the day they don't need you? Right. And I know this for a fact, people struggle with that conversation. And some people don't, but what you don't want to do is go home and hang around the house and drive your spouse crazy so they kick you out, right? I mean, and
I see that all the time.
Of course you do, because you deal with business owners, right? That's the deal. And it's the hardest thing. I use myself as an example of, I have younger kids, and so I don't have time for a lot of personal hobbies now. But the reality is, I need to figure out the hobby thing, because I know I'll drive my wife crazy when I step away from the business. So yes, there's a financial side to what we do, and we enjoy working through that and showing the numbers of it. But there's also, our tagline at Entrust is life well balanced, right? You've got to have some balance on the other side, or everything you've worked for as a business owner, if you get a ton of money, everything you worked for is for nothing if you don't have somewhere to land at that point. Right. So it really is a balance.
I've got Alyssa here who knows you personally, and she says that I can tell she's chuckling away because she does confirm that you would drive your wife completely crazy if you were just hanging around the house.
Yeah, she's right. Yeah, she's right. Yeah. I'll have a side conversation with Alyssa about that. And she didn't have to share that necessarily, but she's correct.
Really, you could tell she's just nodding in agreement. You mentioned the 5 ways that you would to sell your business. Can you walk through it with I mean, we don't have that much time, but just 30,000 foot overview. Go ahead, give us those 5 ways.
Yeah, real quick. So that conversation with clients usually starts with, you're going to exit your business. do you want to be in charge of how you exit or not, right? And for the most part, there's more, but for the most part, there's 5 ways out, right? You can give the business away, right? You can have accumulated enough money during your lifetime that you're financially independent of the business. By the way, that's a great plan. It gives you a lot of flexibility, accumulation aside from the business. Sometimes that's hard to get through to the business owner, but you can give it away. You have kids in the business, et cetera, right? So you can use the availability of gifting during your lifetime, right? You can sell it to a third party, right? Send it out, list it out for sale and sell it to the highest bidder, right?
Okay.
Third way is you can recapitalize the stock, restructure the stock,
Right.
and do a partial sale. It's not uncommon. In fact, when you talk about transactions of the last couple of years, 10 years, a lot of them are, I'll sell most of my business, but I'm going to keep a piece and I'm going to stay on. And the idea here is the second bite of the apple when they sell whatever your minority piece is,
right.
In some cases is as big as the first. So there could be some advantages there. Fourth is an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan, right? ESOPs have been a huge part of the business exit strategy exit world for the last 10, 15 years, especially, right? And there are huge tax advantages of doing that. It's not for everybody, but they can be very flexible and very tax friendly. And lastly is a management buyout, what we call an MBO, right? An MBO is just, hey, listen, I've got a management team. So maybe it's one of my kids or 2 of my kids, maybe not. But when I want out, they'll buy in and we'll find some way to structure that deal. So there's actually a few more technically ways that you can get out of your business. I mean, one is die without a plan. That's not really the one we like to talk about, but people do that, right? But the reality is, that's a summary of the 5 ways out. And, for business owners, you ought to know your options, right? You ought to understand the options. And at least if one doesn't feel like today it's a great fit for you, you ought to at least understand how it works.
Right. All right, Pete, we're almost out of time here. And we have to have you back because what I really like to do is of those 5 options, each one of them are their own conversation. And there are some technical things I'd love to talk with you about. Just, do we sell assets? Do we sell it based on income? Like, how do we value a business? How do we go? What type of documentation and contracts and things should we be, expecting to provide? And how does the whole process work? But we don't have time to deal with that today. But I do want to ask you if for our audience that's listening to this or watching this and they're like, okay, this might be something I want to do. I do want to, at the very least, make sure I have a good buy-sell agreement, but I am looking, potentially to exit my business. I know some of my best clients have, one of the very first steps is to sort of put together a team of people. And I know that somebody like yourself will be part of that team. Can you talk to me a little bit, like if you were a business owner and you were going to put together your dream team of advisors to help you map out that plan, advise you, not only for afterwards, but also throughout the process, who would you include on that team? What types of professionals?
Yep. Good question, because being part of a client's team is critical for us. We're not a one-stop shop. You can't be, right? And you just can't be effective and think you're a one-stop shop. So obviously, we believe a financial advisor is important, right? No kidding, right? And why? Because it is about some of this has to be about the numbers, right? And providing sound advice. A solid attorney, especially in the business and estate planning world, right? So there are general, sort of attorneys who hang out their shingle and do everything. And while that's fine, and they're very competent attorneys, we prefer to work with the specialty of business and estate planners. Why? Because it's a specific discipline, right? It's a very specialized world. You can work with a firm there that, you can sort of fill that gap by working with a firm that has multiple attorneys, right? But attorney's got to be a big part of it, right? Because the attorney's going to draft the documents. While we tend to design them, the attorney drafts the documents, buy, sell, business succession, exit planning, estate documents, et cetera. So that's number 2. You'll be glad to know Gene is an accountant, right? Number 3, is an accountant, right? You got to have somebody who's going to give you some sound tax advice,
Sure, of course.
right? Because guys like us in the advisory world can work very hard to do as much tax planning as possible, but we need the accountant backbone, right?
Sure.
And we need to have some level of communication there. The only other thing, so that's sort of that's sort of the summary of the team. I will say one important thing, and in most relationships we serve as this. The team needs a quarterback, right? We're all sports freaks in our firm, so it's all about sports to some extent, right?
Yeah,
but when I say the team needs a quarterback, what I mean is somebody has to know the pieces, all about the pieces that are moving around them, and probably more importantly, and why clients hire us is to be the catalyst to make sure that all gets done, because you can get great financial advice from a financial advisor. You can get fantastic legal advice, and you can have the best accountant in the world give you tax advice. But if there's nobody coordinating the plan, the priority, and how to move it forward, a quarterback, so to speak, then it's going to be hard to get things done. So that's what the plan consists of. In most cases, there's always exceptions, right? If you bring in, in the ESOP world, I'll say that's a very specialized discipline, but that's really the plan, the triangle of advisors that we tend to work in most frequently.
Pete Pabich is a partner at Entrust Wealth Partners in West Hartford, Connecticut. Pete, first of all, what is your website?
So it's entrustwp.com. We've got a lot of content there that speaks to at least some of the things we talked about today. And I should also say we're pretty active on LinkedIn as well. If any of these ideas sort of resonate, follow us. Right? We're always adding content, hopefully aimed at not patting ourselves on the back and all the wonderful things we do, but value to business owners. Obviously we can be contacted either through that website or through our website and LinkedIn if anybody wants to have a side conversation. You can imagine from this conversation, hopefully you can see we have a passion for what we do. We'd certainly enjoy that.
Pete, thank you very much. I want to say also you're a very handsome guy. I like your style of dress as well and hairstyle. It is,
I fixed it up. I fixed it up nice. I fixed it up nice for you. A little powder, and I thought it was looking good.
Yep, I like it very much. And we'll just let the audience decide who's better looking, okay? And that'll be
I think Gene, to be fair, I think we established that before we started. You established it. I said nothing. I do admit. Well,
for any of those latecomers, okay, they can make their own decisions independently. Hey, thank you very much. It was great speaking with you guys. You've been watching and listening to the Hartford Small Biz Ahead podcast. If you need any advice or tips or help in running your business, please join us at smallbizahead.com or sba.thehartford.com. My name is Gene Marks. Appreciate you watching or listening. We will see you again next time. Take care.